Welcome to the IME Community Podcast, where self-love is your superpower to achieve your weight and life goals and make your mark in the world. Your host is Dr. Carla, activist, MD. If you're a teen who's looking to revolutionize your health and can't wait to follow your dreams, welcome to the IME Community.
Welcome everyone. This is Dr. Carla. Welcome to the IME Community YouTube video and podcast. I'm so excited because I have my amazingly brilliant friend and hunger activist, Elin Sampson, who's the Vice President of Operations and Impact at the Food Bank of Lincoln, who's going to be sharing all about her work and her journey. And she's just an incredible visionary, and everyone in this community knows her and a lot of other communities. And so I thought sharing her work, especially with COVID and the pandemic and all the needs that are out there and how the Food Bank of Lincoln and she in her position are addressing the needs and all the challenges, the successes. I mean, she's a really stay the course advocate for the food bank, for the mission of the food bank, and a very innovative person and visionary around something that, if you know food bank language, is around shortening the lines. So really trying to get to the root cause of why people are struggling with food insecurity and hunger. And so I've known Alynn for 10 years, probably. I was on the board of the Food Bank of Lincoln for 9 years, and I love serving. It's an incredible organization. If you are from another community listening, hopefully you are, then please reach out to your local food bank and learn about how you can support. It's needed now more than ever. So as someone who was working in the community as a pediatrician and helping my patients who were struggling with hunger and the families with food insecurity, and also when I launched my nonprofit, Teach a Kid to Fish, that was really embedded in the community to work on childhood obesity prevention, Alynn and I and the staff of the food bank and the board, we worked really hard especially she was a really visionary founder around child hunger programs in this community and a program called Bridges Out of Poverty that we'll learn more about, but worked really hard to increase access to healthy foods. It's really a challenge. And I think made a lot of headway in that area. So really proud of that. And so let me go ahead and introduce Elin. So Elin Sampson is the Vice President of Operations and Impact for the Food Bank of Lincoln. She's been working with the food bank since May of 2008. Elin provides oversight to all operations and programming for the Food Bank of Lincoln. She's a certified trainer for the Bridges Out of Poverty constructs and trains businesses, organizations, civic groups, and other nonprofit agencies on how to bring economic stability to the community and create a common language around poverty, which I've been involved in watching Alynn have the vision for Bridges Out of Poverty. And it's much more than doing the trainings. I mean, it's really bringing the whole vision to the community. And that is not an easy task. We talked about that last time on the podcast. This is the most challenging, the most difficult, the most impactful and rewarding work you're going to do is when you're at that kind of end user stage of working one-on-one with the community and you see the need, and it's really tough, challenging, and rewarding. Alynn is a 2006 graduate of Nebraska Wesleyan University, with a degree in social work, sociology, anthropology, and received her master's degree in social work from the University of Nebraska, Omaha in 2015. And I read that and I was like, I can't believe it was that many years ago that you finished your MSW. So cool.
Oh my gosh.
And I was thinking, one of the reasons why I wanted to launch this IME Community Solutions for Children's Health YouTube video and podcast series is because I feel like I listen to Dr. Brene Brown, who's the most famous social worker with a PhD in social work, but we have our own Dr. Brene Brown here. And I feel like in our community, no, seriously, Alynn. I mean, I feel like, I've listened to podcasts and I adore her. I love her. I learned so much from her research. She's changing the world for the better. And at the same time, we have people, like you, who are literally at that level doing that work, who are experts in the community. And that's who we really need to hear from right now. Exactly like how you do it. How do you align with the vision? How do you stay the course? So anyway, with that, that's a lot. I wanted to add one other thing too, is that one of the reasons why I really wanted to be on the board of the Food Bank of Lincoln is because I grew up with food insecurity and hunger. And it's something that I never shared until I was on the board and they asked me to write an article why I support the food bank. And I started it with, did you grow up hungry? I did. And you would look at me and not think that I was someone who struggled with food insecurity or hunger. But my sisters and I did. Our mom, when our parents got divorced, our mom had severe depression. And so hunger was really a symptom. And it's really, really hard. It's traumatic. And it's really painful. There's a reason it's called hunger pains. Mm-hmm. And I guarantee you that nobody, even my closest friends, know that we struggled with that. So the mission is so important to me. And there's a lot of shame around it. It's really tough. But my message is you have no clue what people are experiencing. And, I'm a face of hunger. And it plays into your life as an adult too, even though I'm someone with high resources now. So anyway, all of us who can support need to support these organizations in our community. It's super important. Okay, that's a lot.
That is a lot, but thank you.
Yeah. So Alynn, tell us about yourself and your work, and also your kids and your family. Because your kids are flipping adorable.
They are something. Well, yeah, I appreciate all of the nice things you just said. I hope that I don't disappoint everybody and just be a dud for this entire thing. But yes, I have been at the food bank since 2008. And I think when I applied, I had no idea what the food bank was. I think that a lot of people still to this day do not understand food banks, how they work. But I just saw the title. It was backpack coordinator at the time, and it had to do with feeding children. And so I thought, that is something that I could do. And I think for me, from just early on, I have just had a strong interest in social justice issues from very young, just wanting to help out, wanting to be a part of the community. And I can just remember so many stories of my mom telling me of things that I always wanted to do. I always wanted to be the helper. I always wanted to go pick out stuff on the giving tree, to buy kids stuff. That was just something very early on that she recognized that, okay, she really wants to be the helper, be that person. And so I grew up thinking that I was going to be a teacher, that was what I wanted to do. I loved teachers. And in high school at Lincoln High, yay, go Lynx, I had a teacher who completely changed my world, and it was a sociology class. And she really introduced these broader issues of systemic racism and social injustice and all of these concepts that I had no idea about, and all of these things that were happening to people, whether it was hunger, racial injustice, gender injustice. And I knew, okay, I needed to be a part of that, what was going on. And so I just remember from that point on thinking, okay, well, I'm going to teach people about this then. When I'm a teacher, that's what I'm going to teach. And I went to Nebraska Wesleyan thinking, okay, I'm going to be a teacher. And I in my freshman year, I kept writing about all of these injustice issues. And my advisor at the time said, either become a writer or go talk to the social worker. And I really think that would be a good fit for you. And I even thought at that time, social work was, taking kids from their homes, being a part of that system. I had no idea the scope of what social work could do. And so I had a visit with a professor there, and I knew that that's what I should do. And so that's really how I landed in this work. After I graduated, I landed at a nonprofit, and I knew instantly that was the connection, that, okay, nonprofits are able to do good work. I'm not meant for profit. I'm not meant to be pushed by deadlines and profit, that I need to be pushed by just doing the good work. And so when I came to the food bank, I immediately loved this work. And I think that this place has really allowed me to create those visions. And when we think about the broad aspect, I think that that's what's great about social workers, is they come with such a broad educational background to say, we're not just going to focus on this one thing that's happening. How do we look at the systems as a whole? And I think that was one strength that I was able to bring, is just that different perspective but there's all of these other things that are at play, and all of these other components that we can look at, not just putting food into mouths and then that's it. And so that's really what drove me, is that to think about the possibilities of this work were really endless. And I think that I was very fortunate then to have a great boss who was also on board with that. And we were just such a great team for that, to say, like, what are our visions? Let's dream big, and then let's make this happen, and really created that space to allow that. And so that's really how I kind of evolved in this work. I love this work.
Shout out to Scott Young, right?
Shout out to Scott Young,
executive director.
Who's the greatest visionary. I mean, if anything, I always think, like, what would Scott Young do? That's always my, like, how can I be more like Scott Young? Because he is just such a role model in that, and a yes sayer.
Of compassion.
Yeah. And I think
compassionate.
Yes. And that's where I get so much of that from. So this work is so important. I mean, I have my own family now. I grew up in a single parent household, and my mom was a hustler. I mean, she hustled hard to make sure. She was very frugal. We made, like, our basement into an apartment that she rented out after my parents were divorced so that we could stay there. She was a great budgeter, but she also had resources that set her up to do that kind of stuff. And so we never experienced hunger. I would say we experienced very restrictive budgets. So it was not we would go grocery shopping once a month because she got paid once a month, and we would have to make that last. We would take cold lunches every day. And I can remember, as teenagers, it was very much, we wanted these clothes, we wanted this. And my mom would say, here's what I'm willing to buy. If you want those, you have to pay for the other part of that. And so at 14, I thought, okay, I want to be cool. I got to go get a job if I want this stuff. And so that's how we did it. And she is such a role model to me of then having and recognizing the foundations that are built, what that really means. And if you don't have that, it's not as easy as it's just that idea of, like, well, work hard and you should be fine.
Yeah.
There were so many things that my mom came from and that she had for generations that really set her up, that when the divorce happened, she had all of these things that were in place and skills that not everybody has and not everybody grows up with it. So I recognized that really early on. And then now I just see that so much when we look at people who are struggling and just their resource base. If you don't come from that, there's so many skills that people think are common sense that just are not, that you just assume everybody has, but that's not the case. So, I feel very fortunate now. I have two kids, a 13-year-old and a 6-year-old, but there are definitely times when we go to bed, and I think, as my daughter has asked for the 8th time to have another snack, I think that you have those moments of how fortunate, and I try to have those conversations, like there are kids who do not get this, and there are kids who don't get that opportunity or even go to bed without dinner, and recognizing that privilege. And there's definitely, been times I can remember for my son who would always complain about food. I mean, I would make him come to work, or I would make him write reports about hunger and so that he would recognize, what's going on, because it is something that if it doesn't touch you, it's hard to have meaning attached to that. So
yeah, that is challenging. That's challenging as a parent, isn't it? I mean, to see the need in the community and to grow up in a different way, and your kids have a different level of resources.
Yeah.
I was thinking that when you were talking about the resource base, the things that your mom was brought up with, some people would say, oh, well, that's, she had those privileges, and maybe she would say that, that those just even like knowledge and skills and some sort of support system is privileged now. But I was listening to a researcher who talks about resilience, and people get resilience so wrong. And resilience is like a combination of internal and external resources. And so if you don't have the external resources, then, I mean, you're not going to be able to have resilience. So when we say, like, it just frustrates me so much when, like you were saying, is when people say, oh, kids are resilient. And it's like, or something that you're either born with, like grit, or that you don't have. And that's absolutely not true. So just really kind of trying to teach people about that. Anyway, and also there's some other cool stuff around self-determination theory. I don't know if you probably know way more about that and self-actualization theory. And there's some stuff coming out in coaching around that versus like Maslow's hierarchy that it seems like, and I saw this a lot in my work and in practice, is like with Maslow's, it's it's helpful to know the need, but it's oftentimes it's like, oh, well, it's kind of like they're stuck in it, like
it's their fate.
It's their fate. Yeah. So can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. I can. And I think that's something we see with the Bridges Out of Poverty work and even the Getting Ahead work. These are classes that we specifically work with individuals who come from poverty. And it is this idea of destination or fate, that I've just been given this, and this is my fate. This is what it is. And how do you then, one, acknowledge, okay, this is what we have been given, but then how do you build self-determination? And that is one skill that when this curriculum was created and graduates of this program, there were individuals who built this curriculum for Getting Ahead of here's what it takes to get out of poverty. And one of the resources that was added probably 8 years ago was this idea of self-determination and motivation, that you really do need that in order to make changes or to learn new things. And that was something that group identified that hadn't been identified in years past, to say, okay, you have to visualize it, you have to see it. And that's one thing that we do in our Getting Ahead class is, one, let's just take a moment to take a look at what your life is like right now. So whether they draw pictures, they write words, it really for them puts it in a concrete way to say, here's what it's like. So again, that kind of fate, like, well, here's what my life is like. But then a safe space and time to say, well, what would it look like in the future? What is that? What do you want it to look like? What would success look like for you? Or what would stability mean for you? Because it means something different for every person, that it's not just about, let me throw $5,000 at you and you should be fine. And so I think that that's such a great piece of our classes. Stability means so much for everyone, and putting that on paper, whether they're writing it or drawing a picture, reminds them then, okay, what do I need to do to get there? How do I make that a reality? How do I if that is what I want, what do I need to do? And sticking with that. So it's not like we make the picture and then it goes away. It's then for the next 11 weeks, okay, how do we work towards that? And how do you make that come true? How do you really say, no, this is what it is going to look like for me, and I'm determined to get there?
That's like your massive action goal. It's like to believe. The art of like believing on purpose is like talk, like to evoke like positive emotion activation is going to be motivating. It's not the like negative emotion activation that we get when we just tell people what to do. And a big part of Bridges Out of Poverty is really getting the whole business community, the funders, everyone around a more of an understanding of the needs. And then oftentimes people who have say that the reason that people do not have is because they don't have that grit, or there's, they're not motivated, or, there's something individually wrong, but it's not true. It's just like you're doing with Bridges Out of Poverty, is working individually with them to support them to believe that it's possible.
Yes. I think that's such a huge piece, and giving them a safe space to digest all of this information and really look at the truths that they've had for generations, that, this is the way, kind of how, I would say middle class judges others, that like, well, this is what I know to be true. This is how I've operated. So everybody should operate this way. And I think with Bridges, it's really asking that question and looking at it from both sides to say, okay, this may be what you know, but how do you put that aside and be open to other ways of doing it? And we're asking both sides to do that. And I think that's really the connecting piece, is there is no right way or correct way to build stability or what that means. And so this Getting Ahead class really offers folks, we know that this has been the case for generations, but how do you start building different skills or resources that you didn't even know about? And the same for middle class, that, there may be other ways to do this, that this isn't the only way to be thinking about something, because that's what's worked for you. And I always try to say, in Bridges, that when I talk to businesses or agencies about how do you adjust the ways that you're doing things, because that's just how you've always done them. And I never want people to think that we're lowering any expectation for someone who comes from that poverty environment. I think for us, it's, how do you create an additional pathway for people? How do you create another way to get to that same expectation? So like for businesses or jobs, I'm not asking you to lower the expectation. I'm just asking you to create another way to get there that makes sense to those who come from that environment, because they have different motivations. It's not the same motivation or reason as middle class, because the environments are so different. So it's really just recognizing and kind of calling your own self out to think, well, why do I have these thoughts? Why do I even have that knee-jerk reaction when I look at somebody and I say, don't they know better? And
bias.
Yes, a trainer once told me, it's not that people know better, it's that they know different. So even just adjusting and changing the way that we even think about that is such a key thing. And I think we take for granted the skills and resources that you identify as middle class or wealth. You just take for granted things that you do every day that were really taught to you by just existing in that environment. So no one told you, this is something you should know, this is how you operate. You just grow up learning those things. And I think a great example is things like future orientation. It's such a skill that people don't understand, that we assume everybody's thinking about their future. But if I grow up in poverty, everything is happening that's in a crisis. So everything's happening now, and I'm trying to decide right now how to survive. So this idea of future just doesn't really grow for me in that environment. So it's just that idea of being able to take in information in my brain, being able to see how a decision plays out for me. So if I decide this, then this will happen. If I decide this, then this will happen. And being able to see that. If you do not grow up with that happening for you, that you don't have that skill. And so when people ask like, well, why didn't you think ahead about this? Didn't you think about that? No, because we take for granted that not everybody has that future orientation. And so just something as when you think about that skill, and I have a friend who has struggled with that, of just being able to take in information to see, okay, how does this play out for me? If I decide to do this, then what happens? Or if I decide to do this, then what happens? And that's such a small thing that people don't realize. How do you start implementing that? And sometimes you have to really visualize that for somebody. And there's a great trainer who used like rocks as a physical to say, okay, lay this rock down for that choice. So if you make that choice, then what happens? Lay that rock out. And just being able to learn that, to say, okay, now I kind of have that skill. And so when we think about success, or, I've had so many funders say, so are people out of poverty yet?
Yeah.
And it's not as simple as that. And it's hard to quantify. No, but somebody now knows how to take in information and see how it plays out for them. And they've for generations not been able to do that.
That's
how do you
huge.
quantify that? Yeah, that they don't understand that is an actual skill that we are utilizing, many of us, every day. There are so many times throughout the day that I'm making those decisions like, okay, well, if I decide this, then what will happen? But if I'm living in a crisis, I don't teach that to my children, or my children then aren't teaching that to their children, because we're constantly in this crisis mode. And so I think things like that, that's the visionary piece of, okay, now I've added one more skill to the next generation. And then hopefully that generation now has that one, and maybe we can build on another one. And now the next generation has two more skills that 3 generations ago didn't have. And that's really how you start changing generational poverty, that it's not this overnight, after 12 weeks, I have it solved and done. That's the long work, which, I know very well. And it's hard to explain to funders to say, like, this is a long game. This is a long game. This is years and years and years of this work, in hopes that you could start building different skills that people just didn't know about.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit more about like the data around Bridges, because how many people have you served? And so Bridges works with how many people are in a group that you run through a 12-week training?
Yes. The class that we do, it can be as small as 4 or as big as 10. 10 is really our max that we like to do, because it's such an intimate and emotional process. And so this class meets every week for 2.5 hours. We typically do a meal. If it's an evening class, we provide childcare. So it's really this safe time for individuals to really do some assessing of what my life is like right now. What are the resources that I need? And I think the biggest change that we've seen, when we have the last time that we looked, it was an 89% graduation rate.
Wow.
Which is really huge when you think about 12 weeks. And I think that's a myth. When we think about people who are in poverty, that they're unreliable and that they are not committed, that's a really big deal for us, because they continue to come week after week. And I think it's just our approach and how welcoming and safe this space is, and the importance of relationships, that once people build a strong, positive relationship, that's when the reliability really shows itself. And I think that a lot of times employers miss that piece, or agencies miss that piece, that we're so worried about the goals or getting the stuff done or checking off the list, that we forget this piece about how do we build relationships, and how do I make sure that you know that I think that you matter, and that I want to be here with you to do this work. And I think we oftentimes skip over that piece, because we don't understand how important that is for folks. A lot of times that's the motivation, is relationships. So I think that contributes to our attendance and graduation rate. The biggest thing that we see for our the data that we do is just their increase in knowledge of areas as far as how poverty exists. Why does it exist? That it's not just me that's the sole contributor to this, that they become more aware of this, of all of these systems that are in place that contribute to poverty. Another thing is time management. We've seen an increase in people's ability to understand that and to manage their time. And goal setting is huge. That's more of a qualitative piece, is just we ask them what their goals are in the beginning, and then we ask them at the very end. And it becomes so much more specific at the end of the class. At the beginning, it's very general, like, oh, I want to become more financially stable, or, oh, I want to have a better life for my family. And then at the end, they are very much like these SMART objectives, like, by this time, I'm going to do this, so that by this time, this happens. And again, it's hard to even, that's a success for us, just to understand how specific it is, that they get that, okay, we do a lot of short-term things, we do some long-term goals, but just understanding it becomes so much more specific. So it could be, I'm going to call SCC by March 30th to enroll in my first class, or I understand that I need to make $14 an hour instead of the $12 an hour. So my goal is to find this job by this time. And so there's just those kinds of increases that we see, that it's hard to say, does that get them out of poverty? But again, it's that skill of, like, how do we increase those skills that they didn't know about? And it's such a safe place to do that. So no one feels stupid, no one feels judged. And we really, our goal is to get them back out in the community to really feel like they are a piece of this. They provide great feedback as far as what's happening within our agency network. So, they know exactly what's going on and how we can improve. And I think what I've learned is throughout this process that these are some of the best problem solvers that we have.
Yeah.
We don't utilize them enough to solve problems, because they're solving them every day. But we just don't hone in on that skill enough, that this is an actual skill to problem solve, to be able to get through the day. So now how can I apply that to other things? And I think we underestimate them a whole lot. And I always say, we could have had this thing solved years ago if we just would have invited people who are experiencing it to the policymaking table, really make the changes, because they know what it takes. They are indeed the experts in poverty.
But I totally agree with that. I think that's so powerful. And Jesse was talking a little bit about that too. Like, how do we, when you're a visionary in the community and you're the one who's creating these programs and doing this work and showing up. And like you said, I love that. It's like, you matter and I want to be here with you. And that's the true crux of it, is like, that's what drives us to do this work, is like, we want to be there. That's why I created IME Community, is because it got me out of all the crap systems I was in, who were trying to just use me for marketing and have a title. And it's like, no, I want to be with the end user, the people. And it's so true that, like, successful entrepreneurs, anybody who's successful, loves the problem, not their solution. And so people who are struggling are, I agree, they're the best problem solvers, because they're focused on the problem. They're not just sitting around thinking of these solutions, like what, the privileged maybe funders are, or
I agree. It's so frustrating. But I think, part of the getting ahead our classes and what we try to empower folks is to really feel confident that they can be a part of that process, that, there are systems made to make you feel like you don't belong and that this isn't meant for you. But making sure that they know, no, this actually is, and we can be at the table, and we're going to help you get to the table and be prepared. And so that you feel like you belong there and that you are prepared. So what kind of language they're going to use, how they're going to address folks, what's going to be talked about, so that you feel prepared. And we had a Getting Ahead grad that was really important to her, is to be more involved in the political process and how to do that. And so that was one of her takeaways is, okay, I'm going to be a part of this, and I am going to be at the table because I do actually know things. And it's empowering her to find her own voice, to say, yes, I don't need to advocate for you. You have all of the skills and you can do that. Or for us, it was inviting a graduate to our board to say, this is really important. And I think and being there through it, that we know that it's going to be inconsistent, that maybe there are weeks or months that she's going to be able to make it and months that she cannot because of life. That's just what's going to happen. But do we value when she is there her contributions? Absolutely. And I think that was even in adjusting for some people, to feel comfortable with that and to be okay with being flexible on, again, some of those rules. So like, well, our bylaws say this, you can't miss so many, but who cares? Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
At the same time, we are creating programs, and it's important for us to make sure that we have that perspective and that we are doing things with people and not for them. I think that was something that Scott and I are both really big on, is that do we have the right people at the table? Should we even be making these decisions? And, it's definitely a work in progress. I think we're continuing to improve on that. But, our vision, I think, is how do we do the work with people and not for them? How do we change that?
That's so cool, Lynn. Okay, so tell us a little bit more about the food bank and how food banks work and how many meals you're serving. And
yes.
You serve 16 counties, right?
We do. We serve 16 counties in Southeast Nebraska, and food banks, there's about 200 food banks across the country. And we're kind of like the hunter and gatherers of food. So our job is really to seek out and to gather product and then to distribute that out to the community through our own networks. So through an agency network, through mobile pantries, through child hunger programs. We are essentially a mini distributor of food. So we call our warehouse a distribution center. We are not here to warehouse it. We are here to distribute that out. And we distribute between 9 and 10 million meals each year. Obviously, that has changed a little bit. It fluctuates, I would say, in anywhere between 8 and 11, based on what's going on. But we're getting food, we're part of the Feeding America network. And Feeding America is really like the nation's food banks. They're kind of the hub of all of this action, pulling in large manufacturers and large retailers to work with food banks at a local level. So, one of their strengths is having that ability to, for instance, there's a national partnership with Trader Joe's. So they're setting that up. So then Trader Joe's knows, okay, there's a local food bank. I need to give to that local food bank. Or other places like Aldi or Sam's Club or some of those larger retailers, there are national partnerships that happen. And that's a great connection for us. Or they're talking to large funders. So then that money can trickle down to food banks. They're talking to different growers and producers. So, that we're getting produce from those connections. So our job really is to get all of that food to here at the food bank. And then we distribute it out by the truckloads, whether it's we're delivering to Fairbury, Nebraska to an agency so that they can distribute food, or we're delivering it to a mobile pantry. That's our main way to get food out right now. And then we just have a variety of other programs like our backpack program that sends food-filled backpacks home to kiddos on Friday afternoons. We do kind of a mini mobile pantry in other schools where kids can come down in a cafeteria, select food of their choice, take it home to their families.
And that's instead of the backpack program.
That's instead of,
so how many schools are doing the market?
Oh my gosh. That's a good question. maybe 15.
Oh, wow. Okay.
That there's quite a few that are now operating that. They serve larger quantities. For us, it was about efficiency and trying to be able to feed more students for the same amount of money or less money for us. And that was our way to try to alleviate the waiting list for the backpack program. I think the most painful memories that I have is when I first started here and the backpack program was really kicking off, and just the heartbreaking of on Friday afternoons helping distribute backpacks, and then just a line of children waiting to see if somebody didn't show up for their backpack so that they could take it home, because they would do that. If students were missing, then it would go to the next student who was waiting, and just the awfulness of that entire process of hopeful kids on Fridays hoping that their classmate wasn't there so that they could take that backpack home.
So
And
for
then
people who, sorry to interrupt, but
Yeah.
for people who don't know about a backpack program and maybe they don't have it in their community, I know a lot of communities do have it.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit more about like what it actually means? They get a backpack of food items.
They do get a backpack of shelf-stable food on Fridays during the school year. And the school selects these families and they get it for that school year unless they opt out. So every Friday they come down and pick up a backpack to take home for the weekend. And the last I knew, I think over 100 food banks were doing a backpack program. But the goal was really to try to alleviate that weekend hunger, because the reality is schools offer so much consistency and so much protection and safety. And so kids were eating breakfast and lunch at school. And then on the weekends, it's just hit or miss. That is a time of high food insecurity. And Monday's teachers and staff were just hearing horrific stories of, kids eating crackers or just coming to school on Monday, not really having eaten a whole lot. And so that's really how this program developed. And I think even for Lincoln, which you wouldn't think that it is a high poverty, we have almost 50% of our students on free or reduced lunch. And so there are just some families that are really struggling, and there was never enough backpacks. And so then it was kids just would be waiting and everybody would pick up their backpack, or maybe there'd be a couple left. And then who gets those? How do you decide who gets to share that backpack? And that was always awful. But one thing that I've learned is how compassionate and caring kids really are. And I think that's something that we underestimate or have this myth that kids are ungrateful and that they are just learning to accept free stuff and become freeloaders. And there was an afternoon that, a kid didn't know how it worked. He just said his friend was hungry, go to the office and go get a backpack. And because he thought that's just what you did and how you got one. And so the kid went to the office and they said, we're full, I'll put you on the list. And this little boy was so sad because he thought he could just get a backpack for his family. So he came back and told his friend and was super upset that he couldn't get one. And so his friend opened his backpack up and there were some Pop-Tarts in there. And so he was like, here, you take the Pop-Tarts home. I'll just tell my mom that we didn't get them this weekend.
Aww.
And to be in elementary school, and I think my kids who sometimes lacks compassion, the ability to recognize that. And I think, as you never forget what hunger feels like, and to offer that, to say, I know what that's like. And so I'm going to share the little bit that I have so that you at least have something. Mm-hmm. And I think that kids we can learn so much. And I wish that we listened to kids more and learned from them just about that compassion and that care, that we are definitely not seeing ungratefulness or people taking advantage of us. But that, I think right there, kids recognize that and they understand what that means and really care for each other. And I think I've seen that in elementary school all the way to high school. And at Lincoln High, we saw that where there's been times that it's been so busy when we first started that we would sometimes run out, and we just wouldn't plan for enough. And a student came through and skipped a couple items. There was some produce, and we asked him, like, oh my gosh, you can have some of this. And he said, no, I see the line out there, and there are some kids that I know that are struggling more than I am. So I'm going to skip those so that they can at least get some of that.
Wow.
And, that's a high schooler. And I just think I think we have this vision or this idea of, snotty kids or, and it's just not that I think that there's a lot of care and just empathy and this understanding, like we are all in this together, that, we get what this life is about, and how can we build our own community together and support each other. And I think that really has shown me a lot about what community means, and how we are truly in this together, and has changed my mind about just even youth in general. I think I was apprehensive about high school markets and how that would look. And I've just seen some of the most respectful and grateful kids that have come through, and some of these lines. And that really, is why I still do this and what really the work is about.
Yeah, so much more than the getting the food in the hands.
Mm-hmm.
Kids and families and community is so important, but it's about building and creating that supportive community and network so that they know that they have a place where it's like, you matter, we're here to support you. They're not alone. They believe they deserve to have their needs met. It's such powerful work. Okay, I know it's a funny story of when you first started, and you and Scott went to Scott Young, who we talked about earlier, was a former executive director. And also shout out to Michaela Klumpke, who's the new executive director of the Food Bank of Lincoln, and the capital campaign building the building is awesome. I'm so excited. But anyway, I remember Scott telling me a funny story about like when you started and you both went to, I don't know if it was Clinton Elementary or where it was.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
And you really were like, you're just a diehard visionary, like action taker. Like, when do you know, Alynn? Like, I know how it is. Like, it's like, this is going to happen.
Yeah.
Like, you just know in your heart and every part of you, like, I'm going to make this happen. Like, there is just no, I'm going to be fearless. And you don't even have those conversations in your head, right? It's just like, no, this is going to be done. This is going to be fucking and done.
That's what Scott and I mean, we just have so many funny stories. But yes, that was when we were first growing our programs and thinking, okay, here's the amount of funding that we have. Here's what we could do. And so we had just so many requests from schools that started pouring in like, oh, we need this program, we need this program. And so we were trying to create like a tiered system of, okay, here's who we would go after first. Then we could go to these schools. And so he's like, okay, we're going to go to this school. I think it was Color Middle School. And they were like right on the cusp of like, okay, we still have some other schools that maybe should be a priority. So let's go in, let's just listen.
They had a higher percentage of free and reduced.
Yes, a free reduced lunch. Okay. And so that's what we were trying to gauge and say, okay, we'll put you on our list. Essentially, we were creating our own waiting list. And so we said, okay, we're just going to go in and listen. Let's just listen to what they say. And of course, the stories started coming out about students who were hungry, staff who were buying snacks, and I just said, okay, we're going to make this happen. We are going to start this program. And we got in the truck and he just said like, okay, so we're making that happen. I said, yep, we're going to figure this out. We are going to make sure that the school has, and that became the joke because it was school after school after school, telling these heartbreaking stories and staff trying to figure it out while they're teaching. And I think that's really what got to me. So it was like every school is like, yep, okay, we'll make this happen. And I just remember after a couple months, we grew from like 800 students to 1,500 in a matter of a couple months because I couldn't say no. And that I think is the piece that, luckily Scott trusted that we could figure that out, or because you just can't say no when staff are telling stories about hungry students. And, I think what got me is that staff were trying to figure this out on their own and buying things and trying to figure out basic needs before they could even teach. So it was, if somebody's coming in hungry, well, we know nothing's going to get done until that student has food. So now I'm going to spend time figuring out how to get you food before I can start teaching math, or before we can start doing this, because I know that nothing is going to happen. So I think for me, that was, okay, what is our role in this? And how do we, again, be that community piece of, let's figure this out to alleviate some of the pressure from the schools having to problem solve that basic need. And so we had a lot of those moments where we would get back in the car and he would just say, well, we're doing that school, aren't we? Yeah, we are.
That's happening.
That is
happening. Awesome. That's all vision and like compassion too. And shout out to all the teachers and school nurses and administrators who are always there for they don't get enough credit. And obviously during COVID, it's been even more challenging for them. So
they really don't.
Their students, and
I know,
even with food, always for them. So, okay. So tell me, tell the audience, how can you fund it? I know how this backpack program is, and you have to have, when you're in a nonprofit or any agency, you have to have a diversity of funding. And the Food Bank of Lincoln has an incredible development director, John Mabry, who's amazing, but he wasn't there at the time. So how did the community come around and support the launch of the backpack program and expansion of it?
Yeah, I think, we are very unique. Of course, we do have one of the best development directors out there. But when we didn't have John Mabry, we were really hustling to get funds in. And I think we're really unique. Our school district here in Lincoln, it's one school district, one main school district. And this school district from day one has been a yes sayer for anything that we've wanted to do. And I think that has been a plus, that backpack programs across the country don't have that partnership, or as positive as a partnership where there's not a lot of hoops to jump through. And so that was really the key for us, is we want to make this work. Let's pilot it. And then when it did work, it slowly started growing and people started hearing about it. And then it was, well, now how do we fund this? And so it came at a perfect time for us, because the school district as a whole they were doing an annual giving campaign and a walkathon, essentially. So that time they had been doing it for 5 years for an organization, a charitable organization. And they were right at that time thinking, is it time to move on? Should we do something else? And that was when the backpack program was really starting to kick off. And so they decided, let's do it for the backpack program. Let's really make this happen. And so the entire district does this fundraiser, and then they show up and walk and celebrate the funds that were raised. And I think they had been raising like $50,000 for this organization prior. And that very first walk, it was like $100 and some thousand that they had raised. And so I think at that moment we knew what that meant for us, that, okay, people are on board. They want to help end hunger. And more importantly, the entire school district is on board. And so at that time we had a part-time coordinator, and I think for Scott and that part-time coordinator, they knew, okay, this is growing and it's going to become bigger, and we need somebody full-time to do this kind of work. And so that's how I came on board. And I think then year after year, it just kept growing, that walk and those funds. More people started hearing about it. So individual people would be donating separately from that walk throughout the year. Funders started getting on board. I think, fortunately and unfortunately, it's so easy to give to child hunger. When you think about a kid hungry, It's very easy to reach into your wallet and give money for that. It's a lot harder to feed that mom who is experiencing that hunger. It's a lot harder for people to reach in their wallets and give to the hungry mom or the dad or the veteran or someone struggling with addiction and experiencing hunger. It's harder for that. But what we decided very early on too with our backpack program is, again, that kind of holistic approach of traditionally the backpack program was just for that student. So they would only do individual items like the individual cups of fruit or raviolis or cereal bowls. And we decided very early on that we needed to feed that whole family, that we would never want to put someone in a situation where they were only taking food home for themselves and then not anyone else. And so our stance was, does it make it a little heavier? Yes. But we want to make sure that there is something
to carry it home.
Yeah. We want to make sure that there is something for everyone. And that we don't want to put the kid in that situation. But that, comes with its own ethical issues too, that we also had to work through of like, is it the kid's responsibility to feed their entire family? And, so we have wrestled with all of that and talked to schools and families to say, would you prefer the individual, is this too much? And the feedback that we've received throughout the years is to not change it and that they will make it work to get that home because their families do need it. So
wow,
that is,
so powerful. It's amazing. So you had a partnership with the school, but you had a champion, right? Did you work with Dr. Marilyn Moore?
Yes, Dr. Marilyn Moore was a huge yes sayer. Yeah. And huge supporter in everything that we did. And I feel like that just trickled down to all of the schools to say like, no, we are doing this. And when Dr. Joel came on board, he completely believed in it. And again, just continued on that culture of we're going to say yes to the food bank. And I know that not every food bank has that kind of partnership. And so Scott and I have always talked about, and now Michaela, that we never take that for granted because it could turn, we don't know what's going to happen now with Dr. Joel retiring, that you hope that the next superintendent is just as supportive because we have been very lucky that they've always said yes. And I think COVID strengthened our partnership, that they said yes to anything that we wanted to do. They volunteered at our mobile drive-thrus when we were located at schools. They really wanted to make sure that we had access to their families, especially when the school shut down. And they were willing to do whatever it took. And I think that really was real powerful for us, that they were on board and they would do those calls home early on and say, here's where the food bank will be. And they would do that every single week to say, here's where the food bank's going to be this week, or they would post it. And then of the winter, they let us put up some tents at a couple of their school locations so that we could continue feeding there. I mean, they have just been amazing partners and huge advocates. At Bryan Community School, we have a standalone pantry there. We were at a middle school and a portable. And when they needed that, they said, we're going to build you shelves in a school so that you can have a pantry there. And I just, it was no cost to us. That was something that they funded and built. And I just, those are things that we're very fortunate. They get it and they, want to make sure that their families have access to food. So
it's incredible. So what do you think is a key? I mean, you're aligning with the vision, right? The school district, you had a high level champion.
Yes, we did.
And you had a lot of things that you did, it sounds like correctly, that probably contributed to the success and sustainability. I think you all framed it up. Well, initially it was backpack, but then really worked around child hunger programs.
Yep.
There were so many shared stories. And so I think that's just so powerful. You
Yeah.
had such a defined need. So those stories were powerful too. You piloted it. Also, the other thing that's really powerful is that there were a lot of volunteer opportunities so that the whole
Yes.
community could really connect and see the
Yep.
really see the fruit of the labor of like unpacking the
Yep.
backpack and then we're distributing them and you're actually putting it into the hand of the child, which is really
Yes.
powerful.
It is. And I think that's contributed to our sustainability of this program is when people can be a part of it and feel it and see it. I think that that's been a huge piece that we've been able to offer. And again, the schools who said yes to say, yeah, bring in volunteers. They can. So I think that that's been huge is that we continue to offer that to say, if you want to see it, we want you to be involved in it. And I think I think it's important for, again, like the youth to see that, no, we're behind you. We're here. Not in a way that's showy off of volunteers to, oh, you want to hand out to these underprivileged, that no, we want to do this with people. Again, it's that idea that I just want kids to see that the community's behind them and that we're here and we're showing up and we want you to do well. And we don't expect anything in return as far as, like the gratitude or having this high emotional, like, oh my gosh, thank you so much. That, that's, we don't want that. I think it's more of just, we want you to know that we're going to keep showing up for you. And I think that's important. And I hope that they remember that. Yeah.
We're going to keep showing up for you. It's awesome. Yep. So you referred to this a bit, but tell us how COVID has affected the food bank. I mean, come on. I know it's been
oh my gosh. It's completely changed how we operate. And it's kind of put, as we talked about, we are traditionally the distributors and we're trying to get food to agencies and partners. And then during COVID, we became the feeders, that it kind of stopped where as agencies started shutting down, volunteers.
So give us an example, like Center for People in Need is an agency, which is another local nonprofit that has a mission to address poverty in the community. So the food bank takes food, and then they distribute the food to the family.
Yep.
But during COVID, you all.
During COVID, the center and the food bank were huge feeders in the community. The center went to distributing food every single day, and so did we. They took everything back to their building and were distributing out of their own building. And then we just decided to, that was our focus, that we stopped doing everything else as far as our child hunger programs. We shut down to the majority of agencies who we were distributing food through. We stopped doing pickups at our local stores, that we were just focused on feeding. So we were out every single day, multiple times a day, all across our 16 counties doing these drive-through mobile distribution. So we were taking truckloads, people could drive through. We were just putting them in their trunks. And it was a Monday through Saturday operation. Wow. And we had split into two teams at that time. We had a green team and an orange team, and we split our staff up. We had a permanent work from home team, and then these two teams that operated every other week. So that way, if a team was exposed, we had another team that never had access to them, so that we could continue operating. So it took months before we even had to deploy that. I think, we split up in March, and it wasn't until November that one team did get COVID. And so we then had the other team operate for, it ended up being about 3 weeks solely until that team was fully good. But that's why we did it, so that we didn't have to stop anything. Wow. And it was extremely busy. I think when COVID started, everybody thought like, we're going to do this for a few months and then we'll get back together. And it was a full year of doing that. And I think a lot of our administrative staff continued to do their work from home. Some of the program staff became operations staff. So that was really my first of just diving in and becoming part of the operations team and learning, how to use an electric jack, learning how to build pallets, learning how to take orders out of our system. I mean, it was such a learning curve for me personally and also physically, just being shoved into that. But it was one of the best experiences at the food bank. Again, because I was able to do everything alongside of the staff. And I think that's so important to me even today. I think that's the hardest adjustment that this has been, is stepping away from that, doing that work with that group every day. Because I just have such a strong feeling of I never want anybody to think that I am too good for that work, or that I'm asking you to do anything that I wouldn't do. And I think that that's, if that's what became so important during COVID, is that we were truly all in this together. And we were there, every day doing that work. And so we hustled hard. That was when we had great resources from the government. The government stepped in and was giving us tons of product. We received lots of CARES dollars and able to purchase funds. So we were handing out some of the best foods that we've ever handed out in the history of the food bank. So it was tons of fresh produce, dairy products, meat products, and then we had lots of shelf-stable product as well. So that was a very fortunate experience and we hired a couple staff during COVID. So coming down from that, they've never seen anything different. And now things have changed as far as our food resources. So it's been kind of a shock to them to say, like, well, actually, this is how it was before COVID. Now, like, this is actually normal. But it was a crazy time. We've distributed more food than we ever have before. I think our staff grew closer than ever before. And I think it was a great eye opener for me about the work that our drivers and our distribution staff do. So it was, it was so hard, but because I think there was, at the beginning of COVID, there were so many people panicking as far as in the community, people that we were serving, and people who were scared and just didn't know what was going to happen. And so one of our very first distributions out in a rural area, our staff just came back really shooken up. I mean, they were, because they ran out. And so, but people in the lines were so anxious and emotional and afraid, because of course we wouldn't be back for another month. So our staff just started taking like one item out of the food bags just to give to people. And it was so emotional for them. They came back just, emotionally wrecked. Yeah, because they just thought, like, what is about to happen? Like, they have never seen people so scared. And I think at that moment we knew that this was going to be big, and that we had to figure this out and make sure that we were feeding as many people as we could and showing up as many places. And so we started mapping out places that we had never gone before, and just started making calls to say, like, we're going to show up at this spot. Is this okay? And that's really how we did COVID.
Wow. I remember
that
happening. But yeah, it is. And so I remember, like, since I live close to Leffler Middle School, it's like,
oh my gosh, that line
of cars. I was just going for a walk like I usually do, and I was like, oh my gosh. And then I saw the Food Bank of Lincoln truck. It was like, oh my gosh. I mean, all these families who had never needed food before. They had never faced it, but I mean, they were just really challenged.
They were. And it was such a hard time. That line was very stressful. But yeah, so many, I mean, it was like the schools were shut down, which is such a huge primary feeder for so many families, that it was, we had seen people that we have never seen before, and honestly didn't even know what to do, or they were so embarrassed to come, or they felt like they had to justify and tell us what happened. And, we are just a no questions asked. We don't care what brought you here. We're just here to give you food. And so that, I think, was a challenging to be on the other side to now. There definitely were people who have donated to the food bank who are now in line because things just shut down. And it was a very memorable time. And we're still in it, that we are still experiencing it. And I'd mentioned earlier, our numbers are starting to go up again. And we're wondering what is going on about, with that we're seeing an increase. I think that for so many that we always know those who are in poverty or in the lower middle class, once something like this happens, they're always the last to recover. That it's easy for us to think like, oh, things are getting better because the stock market's back up, or this millionaire is back to making $5 million a year or whatever.
Yeah.
But the person
Elon Musk sold off some of Tesla,
Right. He's shipping more people to space, so everything must be fine.
Yeah.
And it's not. There were people who had to make job changes and who are still struggling to dig out of that mess that happened, or who lost jobs. And so obviously they didn't get kicked out or evicted. But, all of that has to be paid back at some point. So, people who couldn't afford their mortgage for a time, all of those things are coming up that, okay, that has to be paid. And so people are still behind. They're still behind financially, even though they have jobs. That it just doesn't magically dig them out of a year of building up debt and all of that. So I think we forget that just because it seems like it's getting better, there's still families who are definitely struggling and still trying to figure out how to make ends meet after a year. And now it seems like it's just picking back up again. And so what is going to happen?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, I'm glad that the food bank is there to help support and share the stories of the need. I mean,
yes.
Keep sharing with the community so that people can step up and support. So tell us a little bit about healthy food access. I know that's just such a challenge. The food banks always get so much crap about the food that's handed out, and it is a challenge.
Yes, it is. I think that's always been something we've struggled with, is the consistent healthy access to food. And that was, we have a produce truck called Lincoln Fresh, and that truck goes out Monday through Thursday, and delivers fresh produce to people. And then we use that. We have a map called Place Matters that's in Lincoln, and that maps out what areas of town have low access to fresh produce or healthy foods. And so we use that map to say, okay, where do we need to go? What would happen if we just decided twice a month to go to that same area and provide them with fresh produce? Would that change the map in years to come if we kept doing it? And so that's how Lincoln Fresh evolved. And we purchase fresh produce primarily for that. But our goal really is to make it fun. It's geared towards kids so that they feel comfortable coming up to the truck, picking out produce, picking out things that they're both familiar with, but then also maybe they are not familiar with. And so we go to some preschool locations, Head Start. We go to 2 of those. That's a big stop for us. We've gone out to a couple other child care centers, and it's really geared around where to try to provide consistent access so people can count on it, and try to just develop those that excitement around produce and healthy eating, but not force it upon anyone. That it's not, we don't have this hidden agenda of like, you're doing everything wrong, this is only what you should be eating. That it's, again, just to have them see it and know that we're going to be there again to show up. And I think it's really fun for kids. Since COVID, we've bagged everything up, but before we have these shelves on the outside of the truck and they get to select it. And so the great thing is, if you have 3 kids, all 3 kids, we want them to pick stuff out. So it's not just one person picks out for the family. If you've got kids, then we want all the kids to experience it, pick it out. And then for new things, we'll try to make sure we have directions. So like mangoes are a big thing of like, how do you cut them? We've partnered with UNL Extension, so they'll sometimes do samples based on what we have, so that families can try new things and see what's on there. Or they'll have little simple recipes. So it's been a great addition to the community, I think. And it's our way of saying, we still want people to have choice. So, we accept all food donations and distribute them out, but how do we make sure people aren't having to choose between healthy foods or cheap, unhealthy foods, that we are making sure that they have access, and that that's not a choice that they're having to make, because it's, produce. I think it's not that people don't want to eat it. It's a risk. And I think it's a risk for you to buy it. And knowing that I know that my kids will eat this bag of chips or these boxes of macaroni and cheese, but I don't know if they'll eat these strawberries in time before they go bad. And that's a big risk to spend $8 on that and not know. And so this is a way to take that risk away, to say like, but you still can get it, and we want you to have it. And so that's
great.
Been a big thing for us. That's really exciting.
Yeah, an awesome job with that. So
yeah.
Cool. So the Lincoln Fresh is funded by the Community Health Endowment.
Yes.
Or it used to be.
Yes.
The Place Matters and the Community Health Endowment of Lincoln is a public fund that our community luckily has to support the health of the community. And so the fund gives out grant dollars to different organizations that are contributing to improving the health of the community. And Place Matters is a really cool project that looked at the risk of the different health conditions as related to the zip code, so that your geography, your zip code matters as far as your health and health disparities, which I'm sure I haven't seen Place Matters data during COVID, but I can imagine that things are worse because health disparities have worsened during COVID. Healthy food access has worsened. So.
It has. So we're still out there. I think that, we just ended our season with that truck. But then we're excited. Next year, we're getting a larger trailer unit to get to our rural communities. That same idea, that how do we get more fresh produce? How do we let people select? So that one we're calling Hometown Fresh. And that'll be out. Very similar idea of how do we get to these areas that don't have access. So we're trying to pick pretty remote areas that are 10 to 20 miles from a grocery store, or there's some areas where it's 30 miles to a grocery store or 30 miles to our nearest distribution. So how do we just roll up in that town and provide people to come through and get healthy foods? So
I love the name of that, Hometown Fresh.
Yeah.
Choice. Hometown Choice, is that what it's called? Or?
Hometown Fresh.
Okay. Oh, okay. I wrote choice because I love that a lot of the programs you're really embedding the dignity of choice.
Yes.
So it's not just like, oh, here you go. During COVID, because I had to do that, but
right. Yeah, I think that's really important. And I think that's really how you make change. Again, it's kind of that self-determination that I don't think we'll ever be a food bank where we are here to just tell you what you should eat or only give you these items. That we really think it's important for people to choose and to make decisions for their families, but also make sure they have access to all of the educational components in order to continue to make those choices. So I think that's what's great about what we're doing. I think that's great about what you're doing, is just trying to reframe that idea that enough people are telling you what to do. How do we stop shaming you? And,
That doesn't work for anyone.
It doesn't.
I hate it. I will rebel, man.
That's right. I think that's kind of where we are too, is that how do we provide all of the choices, the options, and the education? And again, that self-determination of we know what's best for you and your family. So we want you to be able to make that decision and have that power back. That I think, especially in poverty, that so many people and so many systems are telling you what to do and what you're doing wrong, that can we just be one less forceful power that's saying, no, you can't, let's just make it about them. So
yeah, that's so cool. Okay. Tell us a little bit about SNAP.
Yes.
Because people really get confused about that. People have a lot of bias. Again,
oh my gosh.
SNAP, also known as food stamps.
Yes.
But food banks have a really pivotal role in helping support getting families on SNAP benefits.
Yes. So SNAP, formerly the food stamp program, we have 2 full-time workers, and their job is to do outreach in the community to educate folks on what SNAP is, what is available as far as benefits, and making sure that everyone, if you apply, that you have all of the information correct and in the system. They can apply for you in order to get those benefits. So we have 2 people, and they just travel around to the 16 counties. They have spots here in Lincoln and then in our 15 counties to help people apply for those benefits. And SNAP, you can buy groceries. It's an EBT card. You cannot buy tobacco or alcohol. You also cannot purchase prepared foods, so warm foods that are already prepared. It is simply groceries. And I think, the average for one person is like $70 or something. So it's not like people are getting hundreds and hundreds of dollars for one person to eat off of. I think that's a huge myth of SNAP. In order to be eligible for SNAP, you have to meet some guidelines that are set by the federal government. So the state, there are 2 different ways to qualify. There's a gross eligibility requirement, which is about 130% of the federal poverty guideline. And then once you meet that gross eligibility, there's a net eligibility that you then have to meet. And that's what's set by the federal government. So once you get in the door, that's when they subtract different expenses from your household to see if you meet that net. If you meet the net, then they will give you those benefits based on your household size. So just some myths around SNAP. I think people, the last I knew, the average stay or time people would be on the program is like 9 months. So This is not like years and years and years of people
even if it was
off of SNAP. I think that's a huge myth. And you have to recertify every 6 months. So you have to reapply, submit everything again to make sure that you do qualify. We have one of the lowest error rates across the country, which just means, we are ensuring that people who are on the program do in fact qualify for that program. We have our own checks and balances that we do. But I would say, it's not, are there exceptions to everything? Yes. But primarily, this is to help supplement people who are really struggling. If you look at the federal poverty guidelines, it's really not a huge amount. So it's very, very little income that you have to have in order to meet those guidelines. So I think that just some myths are just of what, again, just with poverty, of what people should look like if you see them using an EBG card. I think people have in their mind, like, somebody should have these holy jeans and have dirt on their face and
no phone
and no phone.
They forget that a lot of people are working, and it's not your place to judge. It just ticks me off.
I know. Yeah. That's definitely a frustration that I see that you just, again, you don't know what people are going through and you don't know their story. And I just think you have to get this image out of your head of what someone in poverty looks like, because again, it could be myself, it could be you, and you don't know how people get things. I mean, I think that's a big misconception, is again, and then where they're going, how are they carrying these to their brand new car or whatever it is. I mean, you just don't know. And I always talk about, if I were on SNAP, and I told this story like right after I graduated college and came here, that one of the graduation gifts for my friends and I is we bought our very first Coach wallet, which was very exciting. And I still have it and I don't use it, but back then I was still using it. And I would say, like, if my husband decided, okay, he's had it and we're over, I would qualify for food stamps. And so when you see me, I may be coming after work from a meeting. And so I'm dressed up, and then you see me get my EBT card out of my Coach wallet. And what are your thoughts? You don't know that it was bought at the outlets, and my friends and I, we purchased it for ourselves. And then you're going to go see me get into, at that time, this small SUV that I owned, that I'm not making payments on, that was mine. And what are your thoughts? You have all of these thoughts, but you don't know that. You don't know that I own this car, and that wallet.
And you get into defending yourself, which you don't have to. And it's nobody's business. And I see it all the time on social media, on TikTok.
Yes.
I mean, with the body positive creators, and it's just like they get so much hate and trolls over the judgment of the external. And it's just so true to form now. I mean, it's so ridiculous. The tactics, it's cyberbullying.
It is.
That's a different situation.
It is. But I just always think, I shouldn't have to like go home and change my clothes, throw some dirt on my face so that I don't feel guilty using my EBT card.
Yes.
When you see me pull it out, that you feel that I'm justified. And I think that's where we've got to change how we react, or like criticizing everything that you see in the line of what I'm purchasing too. That's a big piece of it.
Just stay in your lane, people.
That's right.
Live your life. Right. Got issues too. You're
That's right.
You got to mind your own business, people. So how do we connect? So people need to know and don't understand that food banks do help their clients with SNAP benefits. So that's one thing to know. And also, like, one of the things that's always frustrating is how do we connect doctors to the work of the food bank? And I mean, there's screening now, but they're not all using it. But it's really important for anyone who's a physician, anyone in healthcare, that you have a list of the local food access resources.
Yes, it is so important. And I think, like you said, we're making progress, but it's still not a priority, or, that doctors are kind of screening who they even think would be food insecure. So then they're not asking everybody. That, if I walk in, they think, well, Alynn pays her bill on time every time. She's good about making her appointments. So I'm guessing she's not food insecure. So I'm not going to ask these questions. And so then they skip it, and they may be missing out on that piece. Or I think there's still some of that work that needs to be done as far as who you even think. It's asking everybody. I remember I went to New Mexico, and my son was ill, and so we had to go to urgent care. And they had this whole list of screening questions that they personally asked him, and they knew nothing. And I thought that was really great. And some of those questions were, are you hungry? Do you have enough to eat? Do you feel safe where you are? Do you feel protected? And just had this basic list of screening questions that they just asked him. So it wasn't even that they asked me. And I asked my mom, who lives there, and she said, no, that is a basic. They are all on board with that all the physicians, and I thought that's really cool. That it was all of those questions, that was just part of their routine. And that was at the urgent care.
Wow.
And so I just thought, we're not quite there yet. But I hope that more and more physicians see this as a way to try to screen those, utilize those questions. And we're asking a lot of doctors and physicians to do, there's so many screening questions you could ask, at any visit. I'm sure that they're getting bombarded with, could you ask this and could you ask this?
Well, they can do it.
But I feel like food security is such an important piece. And when you are food insecure, of just so many other things that can happen as a consequence of that, as far as your health. And so I feel like I'm hoping that we continue to make progress as far as making it a priority where we're asking everybody and not just some, and that physicians really see how important it is. And then if it's yes, now what? That they know exactly what to do and where to send folks, so that they have that access.
And the American Academy of Pediatrics, it was in, I think, 2015, had a food insecurity policy statement. And they come up with these policy statements, but really encouraging pediatricians to screen within the clinics. And they took the USDA questionnaire and had like a 2-question, took 2 questions out of that were like simple, validated. And if they said yes to either one, then you refer to the local community resources of the food bank. So we can do that. It's not hard. And especially during COVID, I mean, that's what we do. That profoundly affects their health. If they're not eating, then we have nothing. So we gotta feed people first. So anyway, that's really powerful. So all the doctors, let's step up and do better.
No.
So let me see, I'm going to ask you some questions as kind of like a more community, like visionary.
Yes.
So I want to know, how do you stay with a positive vision when you are just like faced with all the need?
Yeah. I'm going to grab this credit card real quick. Sorry for my coworker who needs to go pay for some food at Costco.
Oh, okay.
I know. Very random.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think, how do I stay positive? I think it's just staying connected to work is the first thing that I think is important, and not losing sight of that. And I think for me, it's remembering, those kiddos or those people that I've run into who do let me in and share with me what's going on. I think that never forgetting that. And I think that's kind of, for me, kind of social worky of just, when people let you in, just realizing what an honor and privilege that is, that they are letting you in into this intimate piece of their life. And what are you going to do with that? And how are you using that? And trying to make change based on that. And I think holding on to that as, when I talk about Perkins, one of our distributions, and that family, that girl that I've helped so many times, of like never losing sight of what an honor that is, that she has allowed me in. And I think that that's what I have to remember is, how do we keep this vision going? Even though, like you mentioned, COVID's never ending, we aren't moving the needle, but never losing sight of her and knowing that this is why we're not going to lose sight of this vision.
Can you tell us her story again?
Yeah, that girl in particular, we have a Perkins distribution, which is the Perkins Restaurant. It's an old restaurant location, and it is by many motels. So they're definitely not hotels, they are motels, and not the best motels. There's a lot of yucky activity happening in these motels. The police are there frequently. There's sex trafficking, drug trafficking, just not ideal. These are places where people are essentially living, not just staying. And so we did a distribution there every Friday, and I started seeing this young girl come out and carry food back to her motel room. And as I started walking stuff over, I really got to know her. And just my first experience with her was, she was probably 9 at the time, just how very purposeful she was about selecting the food that would go back to her motel. So things that she knew would fit in the fridge, things that she knew her family would be eating, just very thoughtful about what she would take. And then she'd just make trips back and forth to bring, I'm going to bring this box and then I'll be back. And I'd always ask her, like, can somebody help you? And I just remember eventually like not asking anymore because I knew like no one's coming to help this girl carry this food. But also important for me to set some boundaries to not get too involved, to say like, let me just carry this to your room so that I can really dive in. I think that was important for me as she was good carrying making multiple trips. So I would set food aside for her. We'd pick stuff out. She would talk to me about, like what they were making. There was a particular distribution where we had sour cream. So she was very excited because they're going to make tacos that night. So now she would have sour cream. And eventually her brother would come down and help her carry stuff. And the thing about both of them is they had these amazing manners for being so young. Just again, very grateful, very polite, very well spoken. This girl was so incredibly bright. And her brother was also extremely intelligent. I was always blown away. And just how they were navigating all of this. There was 3 children and a single mom living in one room. And they were just trying to find food that they could eat living in a motel. So, and we would just, every week, that was like the check-in of, okay, I know that you're still doing okay because you're here. She would tell me about school, and brother would tell me about school, and they would really be so positive despite everything that was going on. And the thing that really got me is the brother at one point had a conversation with me, and he was like, I wonder what it's like to be like an actual kid, to like live like a kid. Because there was so much stuff that he was carrying as far as like having to take care of his siblings because his mom was working all the time, dealing with school stuff, and just regular teenage things that he couldn't even process those because it's like all of this other stuff was happening in his life. And I think those two, that's what I remember. That's who I remember as we carry on this vision, is that I feel like we're indebted to them and that we owe them a childhood, and that we owe them, and we have messed up as a community to continue to allow that to happen, and for them to have this responsibility of figuring out, because I know, their mom is struggling with some mental health stuff, and we know what that can do. And I think, you can speak to that too, is it's not that the mom is not trying. There's just so much happening for her that she's having even trouble digging out. And again, that self-determination and motivation. And so I feel like that's what keeps the vision going for me, is that we owe them, that we are in debt to them because we messed that up. And there are thousands of more of those siblings. But for me, that's what the vision, even though I see, we're not really moving the needle on this. We're not doing as much as I thought we could do by now. But for those two, I think as a community, we are forever in debt, and we've got to make right on that for kids like that.
That's an amazing and beautiful and heart-wrenching story. Yeah. That's actually a call to action for us all to keep stepping up and connect and say, I'm here for you. And I want to be here for you, and you matter, and we're just going to keep going. And that's what it takes. I mean, when you look at the research for Carrying the Needle. Tell us how to support. How should people support food banks, hunger programs? It can volunteer, donate, of course, but.
Yeah, I think it's just continuing to speak up and speak out about hunger, and kind of changing what we perceive as the old hunger, almost, that there is a new hunger, and and a new face to hunger. And it is honestly, it looks just like you and I, that I think we have to continue to fight that myth and that stereotype that this is who it is that we believe is hungry, and that we've got to change that as a community. And I think that we have to really be uncomfortable and not okay with this issue of hunger and poverty, and really take some steps to acknowledge what our own participation is in order to sustain it and what has kept this going. And I think that's the hardest work that has to be done, is unpacking our own, I guess, privilege or participation that's made us comfortable, but also has continued to keep those where they're at. And I think that that's the hardest work. It's not asking individuals who are experiencing poverty to do all these changes. It's how do we get to do work? How do we dive in and really challenge our own beliefs and what we've known to be true, and be uncomfortable and acknowledge some things that we just haven't wanted to.
Wow. Yeah, that's very powerful. Very powerful. Well, thanks, Alynn. Where can everybody find you? I mean, maybe you don't want to share your email, maybe you do. If there are people who have questions and want to learn more about maybe launching some of these programs in their community, or how they can help address hunger in their community, can they reach out to your email or find you on your website?
Yeah, they can find me on our website, which is just lincolnfoodbank.org. And we have a staff listing, and I'm on there.
Awesome. So reach out to Alynn. She'll be super helpful. We already got your takeaway message, but with IME Community, one of the things is like we really focus on make it fun to get it done. So tell me what you do for fun.
What do I do for fun? For fun, I am a huge foodie. So as we talk about food, I enjoy baking. I enjoy trying new foods, new restaurants. That's like one of my favorite pastimes, which has kind of slowed down in the last year. Like there's all these new places that I haven't been to yet, but I would say that's something that I do for fun. That's one of my favorites.
Yay. So, all right.
Yeah.
We'll end with that. And
I
can't thank you enough for spending all this amazing time with me and teaching all of us about the importance of addressing hunger and looking at the root causes and getting uncomfortable and keep moving forward and not being okay with any person in our community being hungry. And I'm so proud of you, Alynn, and I'm so inspired by you every day. And I'm so grateful for your time. And
thank you.
Thanks for joining us and listening. And I haven't decided on the next one, but if you have a visionary champion who's addressing needs in your community, share them, share their contact information with me. Reach out to Dr. Carla, activistmd at imecommunity.com, which I know is a long email, but reach out to me. I want to really highlight community champions who are visionaries, who are staying the course, driving impact on that community level. And they're the people who are really, truly changing the world. So we want to highlight lots of people from lots of different communities. So have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to the IME Community Podcast, where self-love is your superpower. The content of this podcast represents the opinions of Dr. Carla Lester and is not intended as, and shall not be understood as, a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. The opinions shared reflect the host and guest and do not represent an organization or medical group. Always seek the advice of your physician or therapist if you have concerns about your health. And please, like and subscribe to the IME Community Podcast. Share IME with your friends and go to imecommunity.com to join the member community. Don't forget to follow IME on social.